Welcome, everyone. I want to do a few thank yous before we head out. And the first I'd like to thank is Bob and those at Captiva Cruises, as well as our friends at Cabbage Key. And I want to thank our season sponsor, which is Florida Trust Wealth Management. Now, they're originally Sandcap Trust, and their support is very, very important to us because it helps us, again, do these kind of programs. Talking about our programs, it's our hardworking board and essentially our events committee that makes these things happen. I wanted to stress too that, you know, we call ourselves, we are the Captiva Island Historical Society, and Captiva is our home base, but our history goes way beyond this particular island and extends to the outer islands and Pine Island, and that's what we're going to hear about tonight. We're going to learn some things about this very extraordinary place. Rob Wells, who's the second generation owner, is also going to be talking to us once we're on Cabbage Key. So that's something you're going to, I think, really, really enjoy. The people who are going to bring this story to life tonight are two of our local historians who are also board members, Captain Brian Holaway and Betty Anholt.
Well, Betty and I are going to kind of be passing the microphone back and forth as we're making our way up to Cabbage Key. So we're just going to kind of point a little bit of, I'm going to point a little bit about what we're looking at as we turn to the north here in just a minute. So some of the early history, I'll tell you, you can see if you look off towards the west, that is a little narrow inlet, and I'm sure most of you know this, that's Redfish Pass. And that was created by a hurricane back in 1921. And according to some of the great-great-grandsons of the Carter family, when that hurricane came through in 1921, you could step over. That's how small it was. And then within about a week, it would widen up to about what it is today. And so ever since then, they've called the next island to the north, North Captiva, and North Cap is only accessible by boat or small plane. There's a few homes at the very south end of North Captiva. There's 11, and those are all off the grid. And then the middle part of North Captiva is in conservation land. Most of that state park, and in the middle is also SCCF land. And they do a lot of bird surveys up there in that SCCF land in the middle part. But North Captiva, you may know, got split in half in Hurricane Ian in 2 spots. Anybody have any questions as we're making our way along here? How does North Cap get its power is the question. North Captiva gets its power from Captiva. They got it back in the early 1980s. The power line goes actually right through Redfish, and then goes right along those flats. And currently on the north end of North Captiva, there's 400 houses up there. So there's 400 houses. There's only 36 full-time residents on North Captiva. Houses. North Captiva totals is 4.5 miles long. It's 700 acres. Out of that 700 acres, 500 is all protected area. All right, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Betty. She's going to do a little talk on a little bit of get into the history here of Cabbage Key.
Okay, well, first of all, Cabbage Key is probably a mountain compared to any other place in Lee County. It's one of the tallest spots in the county at about 38 feet above sea level. But most of that is a sand ridge, and on top of it, a shell mound from the Calusa. There hasn't been any real archaeological work done on Cabbage Key, and the general consensus is that the Calusa inhabited this area for about 2,000 years, from about 500 BC and on up to, let's say, 1700, 1750. From that point on, from 1700 or so on up to 1900, the Cuban fishermen had built ranchos and were fishing here, taking their catches back to Cuba. But Cabbage Key, it's about 110 acres, and most of it is preserved, obviously. Most everyone knows the association of Mary Roberts Reinhardt and Cabbage Key. Son and daughter-in-law were actually the people who bought the island of Cabbage Key. Mary first came down to Southwest Florida in about 1929. She was an ardent fisherman. She also brought her husband down. By 1937, Alan Reinhardt, her son, and her daughter-in-law, Gracia Reinhardt, had bought Cabbage Key, and they proceeded to build the building and some other buildings that we'll be having dinner in tonight. I mentioned that all of the Reinhardts were interested in fish and fishing, and I'm going to leave that part of the Reinhardt story to Brian.
She started allowing a gentleman that was studying fish up there. His name was Charles Breeder, and he started doing that in 1938. And he continued to do that until 1942, even after Gracia passed away. So he would go up there most summers, and in 1938 he tagged 358 tarpon. It was some of the first tarpon research that went on in the world, and it was right at Cabbage Key. And then they also had a photographer. They had a dark room set up on Cabbage Key. They had when we pull in Cabbage Key, on your left, house called the Tarpon Cottage, and that was where they did the research. Had a dark room in there. They actually shot motion pictures of the film of the fish. And Charles Breeder went on to publish over 175 different publications on fish, and he wrote Fishes of the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of his research right there on Cabbage Key. So Charles Breeder was an early pioneer, and he was a mentor for a lot of people. Has anybody heard of Eugene Clark? Has anybody heard of Eugene Clark? It's called the Shark Lady. She pioneered a lot of doing research with scuba diving back in the 1950s. Her mentor was Charles Breeder. Eugene Clark went on to work at Mote Marine. That Cape Hayes field station they moved it up, and that became Mote Marine. So you have some of the origins of Mote Marine right here at Cabbage Key. And this Eugene Clark, when we were headed back to Captiva, she asked the other board members, she said, does anybody know where Palmetto Island is? But today it's known as Cabbage Key. Mote Marine does studies up in Sarasota. They just opened a new facility too. But they do dolphin research, they do red tide research. They're the leaders in marine research. You know who else helped to do research as well is Rob Wells, Rob's dad. They started a fishing tournament back in the 1990s, and all those proceeds went to local marine search at Fort Myers at the college. So it's pretty amazing. You have from 1938 up until today with that fishing tournament supporting marine studies right on Cabbage Key. It sold in 1944 to the Stoltz family, and Jan and Larry Stoltz from Chicago. And Larry was a commercial artist, and they knew nothing about the hospitality business or boating. Their journey was quite long. It was from 1944 to 1969, and they called it Cabbage Key Studio. He taught some art, and they would have guests come over. And you can see some of those photos on the walls at Cabbage Key. But they would have people come over. They had a 34-foot boat called the Sand Spur. It was a beautiful boat, and they used it for hauling supplies. And then they would take all their guests out. Everybody would be on the island, and they would they'd have food on the boat. Then they had it up until 1969, and then they sold it to, his name was Turner, and he was a big sailor. And Turner actually owned Usepa. He bought Usepa, and then bought Cabbage Key. Some of his guests that came to Usepa were the Becks, a husband and wife couple. And then he offered for them to buy Cabbage Key. But one of the key things they got when they bought the island was liquor license from Usepa to have on Cabbage Key. And they sold it to him for $10. So that's when the Cabbage Key bar, and that's when the first dollar bill got put up. In 1976, it was sold to Rob and Phyllis Wells. and they have had it the longest out of any other owner. And Rob and Phyllis, they would have to bring everything over with crews, and they serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They bring the supply boat over in the morning at 9:30. So they bring some of the staff over every day, and then they'll leave at like 2:30. And then they'll have people that live there do the night shift, like the people. And here we are. Look at this. Here's Cabbage Key. They got the light on the. It's been a while since I've been out here at night. Look at that. There's the water tower. That water tower goes back to the 1930s. That water tower holds 6,000 gallons of water, and that's original. And you know we get hurricanes, they fill that. What about Jimmy Buffett? Yeah, they just moved Jimmy's dollar bill about a month ago. It's in the main bar area. It's not behind the bar now. It's under glass in the bar. Jimmy was here. Jimmy was here on Cabbage Key. Is it the cheeseburger in paradise? You know, I say it's one of those places between Barbados and here that make that claim. But I will tell you that my wife and I were at a Jimmy Buffett concert. Jimmy says, "How many people been to Cabbage Key?" And I'm like, I just left there about 4 hours ago. And then he started to sing Cheeseburger in Paradise. So I don't know if he does that, but that was a true story. Yeah, look at that. Sunset over Cabbage Key. Look at that. This is the only private house on the island. They own the rest of the island. All right, guys, we were just about ready to tie up to the dock. So we'll head up the hill and we'll meet Rob up there.
How's everybody doing tonight? Can you hear me out there? All right, they can hear me on the front porch. The Cabbage Key technology is a little bit of a slow thing, so let me see if they can hear me on the back porch. Guys, back on the back porch, can you hear us? So I got to try to figure out what historically is significant about what we're doing. And it feels a little weird talking about yourself in a historical way. So I was trying to figure out, what is that, how do you go about having a chat about that? I was born in North Carolina and moved to Cabbage Key in 1976 when I was 3 years old. And we lived in the back over here to the right of the tarpon in room number 3 until the owners, the Becks, were nice enough to tell my dad where all the light switches were and how to run this old generator that he was going to get to run. And then we moved into the Beck's house on the backside of the island. So the Wells family's going on 50 years of being out here at Cabbage Key, which dates me a little bit, considering I was 3 years old when we moved here. And that sounds kind of wild. I hope some of you have had the good fortune of being able to work in a family business, because it's been an amazing situation for me. And it can be the best of the best, and those of you that do it know it can also be challenging at times. And so we look at ourselves a little different than business owners, and that sometimes I question that. I think to myself, if I was a straight business owner and I had no emotional attachment to this, would I operate it the same way? And I find myself asking myself that question all the time, and of course the answer is no. But we feel like we're like stewards of the island. Not as much like an ownership, but it's our job to try to see this forward for future generations. And I don't really see myself as being a pioneer. I was thinking about this. My daughter just went off to college. She went to Texas to go to school. And, I think that was really pioneering. She went somewhere she didn't know anybody. I grew up here. I didn't know any different. So the real credit should go to my mom and dad, Rob and Phyllis Wells, who packed a 3-year-old up and came down here and took a chance on making this all happen. And at that time, it was a tough, it was a tough situation. An island with a generator and a ship-to-shore phone, and either they were really, really tough or not that smart. So I'm going to say they were really tough because it's nicer to think that. And they hauled a 3-year-old down here. Now their parents probably said, "You guys have lost your minds," but they were young enough, and if it didn't work out, they probably would have been fine. And they took this chance, and I really thank them for that, because they made my life a really great experience. I can tell you with every decision we make that we think about historical significance and modern day conveniences. And it's sort of a running joke, family conversations. How do you keep it real and authentic, but also embrace the next generation that expects a certain amount of things? And so that's something that we all kind of have to think through as owners. And then how do we keep preserving this for whatever that next generation is going to be? It's the elephant in the room. They always talk about Jimmy Buffett. And my wife doesn't post a lot of Jimmy Buffett stuff because we really don't want a bunch of people saying, "Hey, you weren't the place where Jimmy Buffett wrote Cheeseburger in Paradise." So, but Jimmy Buffett was here. So we see why we get some of this credit. So I heard just recently that we had a bartender that said that my mom once kicked Jimmy Buffett out of Cabbage Key because he didn't have any shoes on. There was only a couple rules you had to have. You had to have your shoes on, and you had to have a shirt on if you were a man. So so I asked my mom, who's 81 years old, I said, "Mom, did you kick Jimmy Buffett out of Cabbage Key for not wearing shoes?" And she started laughing. She said, No, that's crazy. I didn't do any of that. Jimmy Buffett came in, and she had no idea who he was. And he wanted to make a phone call. And we had a phone booth that was a ship-to-shore phone around the corner in there. I don't know if anybody remembers that phone booth, but you'd pick it up, and you'd tell an operator, "I need to dial this number." And the operator would, quote-unquote, patch you through. So she went back to show Jimmy Buffett how to make this phone call. And when she came out, all the especially the female servers were going nuts and saying, "Do you know who that is?" And so that's when she realized that she was just talking to apparently a famous person and showing him how to use the ship-to-shore phone. So funny little bit of history on Jimmy Buffett that I know to be true. We get to keep existing because of people like you bringing in these crowds, coming to see us year after year. And we appreciate that so much. It's never lost on us. So thank you very much. I hope you guys have an awesome time tonight. Enjoy it, and don't hesitate to ask questions. I'll be walking around. If there's anything I can answer about growing up on Cabbage Key, I certainly will try to do my best, and my brother might be around too. So thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate you being here.